if I'm being bluntly honest, I didn't necessarily care. Um, Working on the network, from the standpoint of the radio show, you get to basically cover news all over the world. So, it's not just U.S. news; it's news all over the planet. And in covering news all over the planet, and it being sent to various locations like Switzerland, or having to talk to people in the various locations, you get this kind of, I don't know, world context and world point of view, despite the fact that you're still in the United States, and from a policy position, you still find yourself on the left. Therein lies the rub from a policy position. When I look at what's the left, or when I think about what's the left, I think of it entirely from the standpoint of policy. What are you? I am policy. I believe in Medicare for all. I believe in expansion of Social Security. I think, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If it gets more fundamental to that, it's, yeah, I want people to be self-actualized. And I want that instantiated in the way that we go about our world. And once that's a default, we can find something else to fight about. But at the very least, nobody should be hungry. People should have somewhere to live. And we, as people, should be able to have jobs and everything else that makes us a person. I think people should be self-actualized. And I fight for a society that allows that. That fighting ends up in various theaters. It's like any other fighting. You end up fighting on one, but it gets diffuse and it gets into these other areas where people fight and talk about. From the standpoint of the left, I think what ends up happening is that Sanders opened up a political space for the left. And opening that political space, all of this energy that went back for decades, 20, 30, 40 years, all of a sudden gets activated all at once. Millions of people. We want Medicare for all. We want expansion of Social Security. We want $15 an hour. Meaning it wasn't diffuse anymore. It was very specific in regards to the policies that people wanted, and the avatar of that was Sanders. He's the guy that basically put a wedge in the space and changed the Overton window, where that wasn't just on the outs like it was in 2008. But by the time you got to like 2016, it became somewhat the context of the argument. The context of the argument. Same thing with 2020. It was something that these guys on the ground, they had to fight on. The fight was over whether or not you accepted Medicare for all, whether or not you believed in $15 an hour, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you agree with Sanders or not became the basic fight of the race. And yes, Sanders lost that race. By the same token, the tenor of the competition and the tenor of the debate had basically changed. Sanders loses. Where does all of that energy go? That energy goes into the left, basically eating itself. And it wasn't eating itself on issues of policy. It was basically eating itself over this identity nonsense, every bit as much as this identity politics in regards to the Republican Party with Trump. Like I said, Liz Cheney voted with Trump like 90-something% of the time. It didn't matter. Well, same thing is true in some respect on the left, especially in the subsection of the left that we apparently occupy. You get characters like Jimmy Dore, Sam Cedar, that basically have their squabble and their fight. And then there's this kind of weird fault line and break in regards to whether or not the person finds themselves with Cedar and his smugness, or Jimmy and his remorseless anger. And you have these basically identities and personalities setting the context for the left. None of this has to do with policy. None of it has to do with policy. And at this point, I am somewhat derisive of all of it. Don't care about either. Both annoy the shit out of me at this point. And all of it annoys the shit out of me at this point because none of it has anything to do with getting any fucking thing done. All of it has everything to do with identity politics and wokeness that they don't like to call wokeness, but that's basically what it is for this subset of the left. Whether it's the TYT crowd, the Jimmy Dore crowd, or the Sam Cedar crowd. Don't care about any of it. I want to get shit done. And they are basically squabbling like children. In the case of Jimmy Dore, TYT, Kyle Kulinski, Aaron Matei, and all of these guys, TYT, after slandering Aaron Matei, should have retracted that statement and offered an apology. That's what they should have did. That's what a rational actor would have done when they realized that they were entirely wrong. You may have people going after TYT and attacking them in various fronts. And I suspect that the attack on Aaron Matei, just because of the way it came out, had to do with audience members or other people basically going after them, saying, you're not covering the story, you're not covering the story, you're not covering the story, etc., 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 and pressing on them to cover the story. The slandering, however, of Aaron Matei was way overboard, especially considering TYT supposedly have 4 million subscribers. They should have retracted that. Aaron Matei should sue the shit out of them for saying that, especially if they don't have anything to put on it. It is slander in the specific legal sense of the word. And he should extract whatever he needs to extract out of them for it. Kyle gets dragged into this somehow. An offbeat comment that Jimmy Dore ends up liking ends up having Kyle respond, which ends up having Jimmy Dore, of course, respond, and of course, off to the races. Kyle gets pulled into this particular argument, makes a hostage video, basically saying that he avoids certain topics because he's basically scared of Jimmy Dore, which is sad on so many levels. You're a grown man, act like it. And in this weird case, you have it being basically insufficient. Insufficient. This put Cal in this weird spot of friendship with TYT versus friendship with Dore, who was basically attacking him. Cal has to make a choice, right? On some level, I would say the answer is no. You don't have to make a choice at all. But if he feels like he has to make a choice, then he feels like he has to make a choice. TYT, the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, comes out with a video where he is well, I just let him say it. I don't have to say it himself. Whether Cal made a choice or whether the choice was made for Cal, it seems that Cal is no longer with the TYT.
Involved in some of these controversies, but and we have people on from the network and our guest hosts more often. Kyle is no longer part of the network, and so he says that he disagrees with us on some policy issues. It is what it is. Good luck to him, and let's see if he can placate the people he's trying to placate. My guess is it'll end in disaster. It has already started in disaster, and probably will head in that direction. So we've had Kyle on many times before, and we had a great relationship with him. We've done many shows with him and supported him. Nowadays, though, he seems to be going in a different direction. Everybody's free to make their own choices.
He's pissed. He's pissed. I can't tell if he's pissed or hurt, but he's pissed. Or hurt, one of them. He clearly says Cal clearly looked like he's going in a different direction. He no longer works with the network. He says, etc., etc. It makes it sound like Cal left. It doesn't sound like Cal was fired or anything like that. And saying he's not necessarily affiliated with the network. At this point, Cal has his own show, and he has a show with Crystal Ball. Considering everything that basically popped off, all of this stuff on some level was based in the attack on Aaron Matei and the fallout from that very specific thing, where basically Cal ends up getting dragged into this kind of conversation and ends up making a choice basically to leave TYT. I would imagine Cal is probably going to make a video on this at some point, explaining or talking about what Uygur just said there, since this seems to be fodder for the day and seems to be somewhat of a big deal for today. But Uygur seems pissed. He seems upset. And in this very specific thing of saying Cal no longer works here at TYT, well, he seems bothered by the whole thing. And on some level, you can see, I think you can see why. If Cal was creating or keeping a relationship with TYT, it's probably he didn't have any bad feelings about TYT. These guys were probably his friends. Well, Dore did not have good feelings with TYT. Now, if you were trying to float in between the two of these things, you probably could do that, providing that these two things don't necessarily meet, or you don't necessarily have to be in a situation with both. Well, the fight that came up ended up being in a situation with both. Personally, I thought Cal should tell both to go fuck themselves. He didn't necessarily want to do that. And this is, I guess, the way it ended up. It's very weird, or at the very least, my thinking about this is very weird. Kyle On some level, I feel bad for him. On another level, it feels like grow a pair. I don't know. Either way, these two used to be extremely close. If you go back to the beginning of this, like 10 years ago, you have Cal even picking up some of Cenk's mannerisms and whatnot. I mean, I used to call him Baby Cenk just because of the way he used to act and whatnot. These two used to be profoundly and extremely close. So it is very wild to see Cenk making a video like this. My memory of this goes back, at least 10 years or so. TYT has been on the air for a very, very long time. And from the standpoint of Cal was arm in arm with him as they went out. Keep in mind, Justice Democrats was between Cenk Uygur, Cal, and a bunch of other people, but Cenk Uygur and Cal were the ones that were pushing this. And so it gets this kind of context on, I guess you can say, some level of gravity in regards to what seems to be a breakup. And it seems to be a breakup because of basically squabbling on the left. Does Cal, Cenk, Dorr, Cedar disagree that Medicare for all should be the policy? That people should get a living wage, whatever that living wage is. That seniors, when they grow older, should be taken care of. Meaning after you work or live a life where you've worked and given some kind of service or some kind of good to that particular society, that society should not basically abandon you and say you're left to your own devices. Do they believe that? And if, as you go down the line, one thing after the next, they say, yes, I agree with that. Yes, I agree with that. You get 10 policies in. Yes, I agree with that. Then what the fuck are y'all squabbling about? And I get that those things, when it's put to challenge of, hey, okay, Hillary Clinton is now running for office. Do you vote for Hillary Clinton or don't you vote for Hillary Clinton? I would say, no, you don't. The Cedars of the world will say, yes, you do. And then that becomes somewhat of an argument. But is that argument, is that the end all be all of all things in regards to the people who basically want those exact same policies? And when situations arise, when there's a push for those things, is it possible that the bad blood that was created either in, hey, vote for Hillary, or hey, vote for Biden, or hey, are you on board for X or for Y? Is it possible that the bad blood is temporary and that the bad blood is forgotten when things come up where it is required a massive push? Because that's not the way this ends up. The way this ends up is there's bad blood, and when something comes up that people should, all things being equal, be for, all of a sudden they're not because they don't like this other component of the left. So Biden pushes a $4.1 trillion plan and things like childcare, whatnot ever. Yes, I don't think for a moment that Biden believes in the $15 an hour minimum wage or the public option or any of that stuff. However, I do believe in trying to get what you can out of a particular situation. And in this, the elements in those things are good. How does it break? Is the left going to look at this and say, well, it's not Medicare for all, so it's trash? Or are they going to say, hey, some of that stuff is good. Those things that are good should be pushed for. My point is what seems to end up happening is that there is bad blood that's created and generated that creates divisions that are so persistent and prevailing that even when stuff comes up that is decent, or for that matter, that is relatively good, that those things are not acceptable. I don't like this faction nonsense. And at this point, I got to be honest, I'm somewhat tired of it. It is somewhat of a big deal for Kyle to make the choice, or for TYT to make the choice, for Kyle to basically be fired because of the divisions and the factions that are basically floating about the left. The left gets not one goddamn thing done, at least from the standpoint of the Twitter left or the YouTube left or the whatever left they want to call it. And yet, it's powerful enough to create divisions within the context of that same left. I really would like to get back to the point where the left was about policy. Hey, do you agree with these policies? Yes. Excellent. Let's go forward and do our thing. As opposed to this factionalism, identity politics, stuff that's pushed through the lens of the left. This is every bit as bad as the woke politics of Hillary Clinton and whatnot, and it is every bit as destructive. Cal is no longer with TYT. I guess I don't have any feelings about it one way or the other, but it is somewhat of a, I guess, a changing of a guard in a weird way, in the sense that these two were thick as thieves for like a decade. And based on factionalism, this I don't know what do you want to call it? I just call it the woke version on the left. These guys broke up. It's a goddamn shame. You can hit Cal for it. You can hit Cenk for it. You can hit any of them for it. All of this stuff started with TYT slandering Aaron Matei, so I guess on some level you can say that they're responsible in this case. But Cenk's pissed. I suppose he felt like he lost. I don't know. I mean, the way his voice sounds, it sounds like he's lost something. Or at the very least, he is bothered greatly by what just took place, or bothered by the break. And from the standpoint of placating, the only person he could be talking about is Jimmy Dore. That he's basically trying to placate the Doors of the world, or that particular group, or that particular cohort. Yeah, he's probably bothered by it. He's probably bothered by it. And I would imagine if Cal, at 3 a.m. between him and his God, is probably also bothered by it. You can have different ideas in the political arena and still end up on some level in association, but that doesn't necessarily seem to be, in this case, possible. And I don't know if that's a business decision on Cal's part, or if that's an ideological decision on Cal's part, where he feels my Jimmy Dore group is that much more cultish to Dore, and if I do anything to run afoul of them, I am going to lose them. I don't know if it's that. I don't know if it's, no, I just fundamentally disagree with the way TYT operates and the things that they say. I don't know if it's that. And on some level, until Cal does a video about it, I guess we're not going to know either. And that assumes that he's willing to just kind of be open and honest with what he's thinking and what's in his head. Either way, change of an era. Again, a lot of people who either just, people who are like 18 years old are not necessarily going to be aware of this. But like I said, these people were thick as thieves. And at this point, based on factional divisions on this subset of the left, TYT and Kyle is no more. Like, share,